The bell above the diner's door chimed like a small private alarm. Terrace moved between booths with the ease of someone who'd learned to make herself invisible, an economy of motion honed by long shifts and unpaid bills. Outside, the city exhaled rain and sodium light. Inside, the room held its habitual careful breath. Low conversation, the clink of silver, the soft hiss of coffee steam. He sat alone at the counter, a dark shape against the glass. The suit he wore fit too precisely to be casual. The tattoos creeping at his collar were a contradiction the room tried not to name. People glanced and looked away. Terrace poured a cup, felt that particular pressure people carry when they are near someone who bends the rules of a city. It was not curiosity. It was caution. She saw the glint first, a tiny flash against the wet pavement outside, the way light catches on something meant to be hidden. Then she saw the shape. A rifle, its silhouette arrested on a fire escape, a figure folded into shadow as if the night itself had taught him how to disappear. The angle felt wrong, like a note played a half step too low. Her stomach went cold. Without time to think, without permission from the part of her that kept life manageable by small compromises, she shouted, "Don't take another step." The words tore through the diner. Chairs scraped. Conversation stopped. He turned. Mateo, she would learn the name later. An instinctive motion honed by a life spent reading danger in other people's faces. Her hands found his arm before she understood the urgency of the action, and the world narrowed to the line of sight from the rifle to the window. The pause that followed was a thing heavy with consequence. Eyes around her reflected a simple assumption: the shot would be for him. Mateo's face, however, did not read relief. It read recognition. In that flicker, she understood something more terrible than the bullet she expected. The gun was aimed not at the man beside her, but at her. The diner's hum resumed, but nothing inside Terry's was the same. The moment had happened, an ordinary room split by a nearly ordinary choice, and somehow it had already started unspooling a life she thought she knew. Before the glass reflected the glint of a rifle and before Therese screamed, her life had been a ledger of small, measured expenditures, shifts traded for rent, tips counted like fragile promises, sleep parceled out in the hours between closing and the next morning's prep. She learned to make herself a dependable fixture, a voice that remembered orders, a back that lifted trays without complaint, a smile that cost nothing and bought a little breathing room. There was dignity in the routine, a slow arithmetic that kept fear at bay. That night, the arithmetic was routine until something else, older than the bills, quieter than the music, shifted under her feet. The diner's kitchen hummed with familiarity. Coffee percolated in a metallic sigh. Plates were stacked with the same clinical order they always kept. Terry's moved through it like someone tracing a familiar map, the root of her existence etched into muscle memory. She had learned to read people the way some read weather. Small changes in the room told larger truths. A patron who left his hat on the chair. A couple who spoke in clipped tones. A man who sat alone at the counter and never touched his coffee. Matteo Arcuri had been in the city a long time, long enough that myth and fact braided into a single, hard silhouette. His movements were the kind a man practices until few notice them at all. A hand placed on the table, a careful study of an exit, an attention to the angles of light. He carried silence like a shield and kept an economy of expression. To the casual observer, he was simply another customer. To those who lived by the rules of the street, he was a presence that rearranged the room. He had been in the diner long before the night grew heavy with threat, and he had been watching the room with a patience that betrayed a history of looking for things people wanted hidden. Earlier that evening, a delivery man had stopped near the fire escape and lingered longer than his route demanded. He had been careful, too careful for someone bringing flour and napkins, but in a way that suggested he understood what it meant to be invisible in plain sight. A woman in the corner booth had felt watched and smoothed her scarf, as if that could anchor her to safety. Someone at the bar swore they'd glimpsed a reflection of a face in the alley window. The story diffused quickly, softened into casual suspicion. The city, which teaches people how to keep their distance from trouble, also trains them to look away when trouble arrives. That training almost saved them all. Mateo's own evening had the shape of an old ritual. He came to public places to see how the city reacted to him, how the petty and the powerful adjusted their posture when someone meaningful sat between them. He watched for patterns. Who sat near whom? What doors rattled when the wind moved? Which cameras played blind? Those cameras meant everything to men like him. They were both threat and surveillance, recorders of small betrayals. He had once lost something to the noise of such recordings, a man who vanished with ledgers that did not belong to him, and secrets that could burn houses of power. That failure was a wound Mateo kept wrapped in discipline. On a day like any other, the patterns lined up in a way that tugged at his instincts. In the subway, he had seen two men converse in hushed tones about a transaction. A license plate had flashed in his peripheral vision. He recognized the cadence, an arrangement of movements that suggested surveillance had settled into place. Back at the diner, his composure never faltered outwardly, but inside a ledger of possibilities recalibrated. A predator, he knew, did not always look like a predator. Sometimes they posed as convenience, as maintenance, as a delivery routine. That thought lingered in the back of his mind like a melody he could not place. Tara's had no ledger of secrets. She kept no record of past failures. Her history was smaller and therefore deeper, a childhood of apartments that smelled like oil and motor grease, a father who taught her to thread a spark plug and then left one morning with a suitcase, and a look that asked her to keep the rest of the story out of sight. She had pockets of memory, schoolyard scraps, birthdays half celebrated, but chiefly she had the habit of survival that asked for as little attention as possible. When she found a pendant at the bottom of an old shoebox, a small metal disc worn smooth with years and clasped in a note that said only, "For when you forget," she wore it like an anchor. It was sentiment, nothing more. Or at least, she believed it so. The city stitched its nights with people who carried ghosts as carefully as others carried umbrellas. Mateo threaded his through those nights like a needle, methodical, searching, familiar with the way secrets hid in ordinary places. Tara's spun her life out like a well-rehearsed song and had not expected the chorus to change. And yet, before the rifle's glint caught the diner's reflection, the two arcs had already bent toward one another. Outside, a figure on the fire escape adjusted the strap on a rifle, a hand finding the familiar groove of the stock. He breathed in as if rehearsing patience. He checked the angle twice, then once more, matching his sight to the table arrangements below. He was not hurried. He was precise. He had waited until the hum of the room made a predictable rhythm, until certain arrivals ensured the angle would present what he required. It was a small, quiet choreography, an alignment of people, weather, light, and memory that would, in one heartbeat, rearrange two lives. The city kept its ordinary breath just long enough for everything to click into place. For a moment after the shout, after the sudden stillness, after Mateo's shoulder collided with her grip, the diner existed in an unnatural pause, like the room itself forgot how to breathe. A fork clattered onto a plate. Someone whispered a prayer. The fluorescent lights hummed with brittle insistence, unaware they were now illuminating the threshold of something irreversible. Mateo didn't waste a second. His hand, steady, practiced, instinctive, closed over Terrace's wrist, not harshly, but with a precision that told her he had spent a lifetime navigating catastrophes. His gaze flicked to the window, following the invisible line she had seen. The reflection caught the faint tilt of the rifle's barrel just as the shooter recalibrated. A flicker. A minor shift. enough to confirm the terrible truth neither of them could name aloud. He wasn't aiming at Mateo. He was aiming where she had been standing. "Move," Mateo murmured, and though his tone never rose, the command vibrated through her bones. The room erupted all at once. Chairs scraped back like panicked animals. A woman yelped and dove under a booth. The line cook shouted something about calling the police, but all of it blurred into background noise because Mateo wasn't looking at the chaos. He was looking at her. "You saw it," he said. Not a question. Yes. I didn't think, You acted before he did," Mateo finished quietly, almost to himself. Not many people see danger in time. Therese didn't have the breath to answer. Shock moved through her like cold water. Her heart was a frantic, uneven rhythm. The pendant at her neck felt suddenly heavy, as if reacting to a truth it already understood. Mateo guided her backward, keeping his body angled between her and the window. He scanned the room with that same impossible calm, cataloging exits, lines of sight, the timing of footsteps outside. This wasn't the composure of someone unafraid. It was the steadiness of someone who had learned to navigate fear without letting it dictate the next move. "Everyone down!" someone shouted, but Mateo was already pulling her low, guiding her behind a counter lined with chrome and coffee pots. The shot came a blink later. The window shattered in a starburst of glass. It wasn't loud the way movies made it seem. It was sharp, contained, the sound of a world changing by inches. A man near the door yelped as shards rained down on the floor. Someone sobbed. Someone cursed. The city noise rushed in through the broken pane, cold and immediate. Mateo's hand pressed the back of her shoulder. Not cruelly, just firmly enough to anchor her. "Stay down," he said. His voice carried the kind of authority that came from living on the edge of consequences. She followed it without thinking. Her breath shook in her chest. The diner's tile pressed cool against her palms. Mateo leaned slightly, just enough to peer beyond the counter's edge. His eyes tracked the shooter's movements with laser focus, reading the posture, the timing, the distance. "He's not running," Mateo muttered. "Professionals don't wait for second chances unless the first shot was never meant for him." The realization twisted between them, unspoken, heavy. The cook crouched near the kitchen door. "What's happening? Who's shooting? Is it him they want?" He pointed at Mateo with trembling accusation. Mateo didn't answer, and that silence alone told Therese more about his world than any confession. She shivered, not from cold, but from the uncanny certainty blooming in her ribs. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered. "Why would anyone—" "Not here." Mateo's tone shifted, less command, more urgency. "We move now." He didn't wait for agreement. He placed a steadying hand at her elbow and rose in a controlled motion that seemed almost rehearsed. Therese followed, her muscles trembling but functional. Adrenaline kept her upright. The diner had collapsed into disarray. Spilled coffee streaked across the floor. A chair lay upside down. Someone dialed emergency services with shaking fingers. Behind them, the broken window glittered like a jagged wound in the room. Mateo guided her through the narrow aisle, choosing routes with an efficiency that suggested he'd mapped every pathway the moment he stepped inside. When they reached the service hallway near the back entrance, he paused, listening. The city's night sounds filtered through the door. Traffic. A siren blocks away. A muffled shout. Nothing that indicated immediate pursuit, but Mateo's expression remained hard, calculating. He braced one hand against the doorframe, shoulders tightening as he considered their next move. Therese pressed a hand to her chest, trying to make sense of the tremor still rippling through her. "Why me?" she breathed. "Why would anyone?" Mateo cut her a quick look. Not pitying. Focused. "The angle wasn't meant for me," he said. "He waited until you moved into the line of sight." But that's impossible. I'm nobody. Matteo exhaled once through his nose, the faintest crack in his composure. It wasn't frustration, it was recognition, like hearing an old echo in a new room. No one is nobody, he said. Not in my world, and not in yours, apparently. The door clicked as he unlocked it. Cold air swept in. Whatever's happening, Matteo continued, it didn't start tonight. This is the moment it reached you. And what does that even mean? Teres asked, voice barely steady. It means, Matteo said, stepping into the alley with his posture angled to shield her. Your life just changed, and someone has decided you don't get to walk away from whatever they think you know. Her pulse stumbled. But I don't know anything. Matteo turned just enough for her to see his expression in the dim light, an expression that said he wasn't convinced, or worse, that he knew something she didn't. That's what we're about to find out, he replied. Together, they stepped into the night, the way people step into the first chapter of a story they never asked to be part of. Warily, breathlessly, with the sense that everything familiar had already begun slipping behind them. The alley behind the diner was narrow enough that the night seemed to press inward, the brick walls leaning close as though listening. The air carried the cold bite of late evening, sharp enough to sting Teres's lungs when she exhaled. Matteo stepped out first, his posture angled forward, eyes scanning up the fire escapes, along the roof lines, across the moving shadows. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. The tension in his shoulders told her he was already calculating the range of every possible threat. Stay close, he murmured. It wasn't a request. It wasn't unkind, either. It was simply the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed when danger was too close to argue with. Teres swallowed hard. She followed, each step careful, conscious of how her knees felt loose beneath her, how her breath kept catching in her throat. The alley stretched ahead, a corridor of dim lamplight, dumpsters, and rain-slick pavement. A cat darted from a trash can, startling her into a gasp that Matteo immediately answered with a sharp glance over his shoulder. Just a stray, she whispered. I don't believe in just anything, he replied. He kept moving, pace steady but fast enough that she had to lengthen her stride to stay behind him. The street opened into a corner lit by a flickering sign above a boarded storefront. Matteo stopped there, assessing the intersection. Cars drifted past, unbothered by the shards of danger trailing behind the two of them. The world continued unaware, indifferent. Teres pressed a hand to her chest, trying to contain the tremor inside her. I don't understand any of this, she said quietly. Someone tried to kill me. Me. I'm not important. Matteo didn't turn fully, but his profile angled toward her enough for her to see the hard line of his jaw. Importance isn't always earned, he said. Sometimes it's inherited. The words hit her strangely, like he knew something she didn't. Teres frowned. Inherited? What is that supposed to mean? Matteo didn't answer. Not yet. His silence felt deliberate, like a door partially shut until he was sure she was ready for what was behind it. He guided her across the street, weaving between cars with the certainty of someone who'd learned to trust instinct over luck. They moved through a narrow walkway between two buildings, the city noise fading just enough for Teres to hear the soft, rhythmic drip of a leaking pipe overhead. Every sound felt amplified, every shadow carried possibility. Halfway down the walkway, Matteo slowed. His attention snapped upward to the rooftops. What? Teres whispered, following his gaze. Nothing, he said. But the way his fingers curled slightly told her it wasn't nothing. It was something he couldn't yet verify. Something that didn't sit right. When they emerged onto a wider street, Matteo finally stopped beneath a street lamp and faced her fully for the first time since the diner. The light cut a narrow line across his features, steadiness in his eyes, tension in his shoulders, and a quiet, unreadable hesitation she hadn't expected. You should know, he began, that what happened isn't random. I gathered that much, she said, pressing her arms around herself. But why me? I don't have enemies. I don't have anything. Mateo studied her as though she were a puzzle he almost recognized, but couldn't place. People don't choose targets without reason, he said. Someone believes you're connected to something worth killing for. Tara shook her head. I'm a waitress. I barely make rent. There's nothing about me that... Don't diminish yourself. Mateo cut in gently, but with unmistakable firmness. You saw that shooter before anyone else did. That alone is enough to make me question what you think you know about your life. The pendant around her neck felt suddenly colder. She touched it, instinctively. Mateo watched the movement. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in recognition of a detail he hadn't noticed before. How long have you had that? He asked. She blinked. This? Since I was a kid. It was my father's. Your father? Mateo's voice thinned, cautious. Where is he now? He left when I was young. I don't know anything else. A beat. You believe he left you? Mateo murmured. Or were told that. The implication rattled her. What are you saying? That you deserve the truth, he said. But I need to know more before I give you pieces that could send you running into the dark without a map. Terrace wrapped her arms tighter around herself. I'm already in the dark. Mateo took a breath, steadying something inside him. Then stay close to me until dawn. After that, we start pulling threads. Start? She echoed. This wasn't the beginning, he said. This is the moment it caught up. A distant siren wailed, rising and falling like some distant warning. Mateo turned toward the sound, gauging distance, timing, angles. Then he nodded to himself, as though arriving at a decision. I'm taking you somewhere safe, he said, until we understand why someone wants you dead. Tara's hesitated. Every instinct she had told her to run, to escape, to find some corner of the city untouched by danger. But another instinct, quieter, older, told her that running would only lead her straight back into the line of fire. She stepped toward him. Okay, she said. Lead the way. Mateo nodded once, an acknowledgement of trust given too soon but necessary, and together they disappeared into the night. One step ahead of a truth neither was prepared to face. The safe house sat at the edge of the city's industrial district, hidden behind warehouses that hummed at odd hours and shipping containers left like forgotten puzzles on cracked concrete. From the outside, it looked abandoned, rust creeping along steel frames, windows filmed with dust. But the moment Mateo unlocked the door, Terrace felt the shift. The air inside held a stillness engineered for secrecy. Reinforced walls, clean lines, faint hums of security systems buried behind drywall. This was not a hideout thrown together in desperation. It was preparation. Long-term. Intentional. Mateo stepped in first, scanning the entryway, the corners, the shadows. Only when he was satisfied did he nod for her to follow. Tara's hesitated, her fingers brushing her pendant, its familiar weight grounding an unfamiliar night. She crossed the threshold, listening as the door closed behind her with a finality that made the hairs rise on her arms. Sit, Mateo said gently, motioning toward a low-backed chair near the windowless wall. He pulled another chair in front of hers, sitting with the kind of poised tension that suggested he was both ready to explain and unsure where to begin. Therese watched him carefully, searching his expression for answers he hadn't yet offered. You said tonight wasn't the beginning, she murmured. So when did it start? Mateo leaned forward, elbows on his knees. For once, his voice lost its edge, replaced with something quieter, older. 20 years ago, he said, a man disappeared. Not a criminal, not in the way people think. He was an accountant, a quiet one, with a gift for tracking details others overlooked. Teres blinked. What does that have to do with me? Matteo didn't answer immediately. He lifted a hand, pointing subtly at the pendant resting against her collarbone. Everything. She looked down, confused. This? It's just a keepsake. My father's. A keepsake, Matteo repeated softly. Or a key. He reached out, not to take it but to gesture for her to lift it. She did, the metal disc warm from her skin. Matteo observed it like someone examining a cipher. I've seen symbols like that before, he said, etched into encrypted ledgers designed to keep powerful men from ever seeing the truth behind their own money. Teres felt her pulse thrum hard. You're saying this necklace is some kind of code? I'm saying your father wasn't who you believed. His tone held no judgment, only regret. When I was in my 20s, I was assigned to track him down. He vanished with information that could topple entire criminal networks. Records, transfers, names, evidence that should have been impossible to steal. My father? She whispered. A criminal? Matteo shook his head. Not a criminal. A witness. Someone who decided he couldn't live with what he saw. He tried to run, to protect what mattered. But men don't disappear because they want to. They disappear because someone bigger wants their silence. Teres's breath tightened. Images of her childhood flickered like scattered snapshots. Her father's tired smile, the smell of motor oil on his clothes, the nights he came home late with anxious eyes. She had never understood the tension in the house then, the way her mother kept windows locked, even in summer. Matteo saw her expression shift. You were 6, he murmured. You weren't meant to carry any of this. Then why am I carrying it now? Teres demanded, voice trembling. Because someone finally believes you have what your father died protecting. The room tilted slightly. Died? Matteo inhaled, steady but pained. You were told he left. But men like him don't walk away from their families. They run to save them. Teres felt the truth tightening around her ribs like a band. All these years, I thought he abandoned us. He tried to stay ahead of men who wanted what he knew, Matteo said. He failed. But he hid something before they caught him. Something your necklace may open. That's why someone targeted you tonight. She stared at the pendant. A simple, worn piece of metal. Yet now it seemed heavier, etched with meanings she never imagined. If what you're saying is true, she whispered, then why didn't they come after us sooner? Matteo's gaze darkened. Because finding you wasn't the goal. Finding what he hid was. You were a contingency, an insurance policy they didn't want to touch until every other route failed. And now? She asked. Now they're desperate, Matteo said. And desperation makes people reckless. Silence settled between them, thick and unsteady. Teres pressed her palm flat against the pendant, feeling its shape imprint into her skin. The weight of the past was no longer abstract. It was tangible, threaded into the life she'd been living unknowingly. Matteo leaned back slightly, his eyes locked on hers. I know this is a lot, but you need to understand, you're not alone in this. You didn't choose what your father did, but you're living in its echo. She swallowed hard. And what about you? Why help me? Matteo hesitated. Because I failed him once. I won't fail his daughter. His voice was soft, resolute. Something inside Teres, fear, grief, confusion, shifted into a quiet, fragile understanding. For the first time in her life, she wasn't navigating a threat alone. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. Then we find out what he hid, she said. And we make sure no one kills for it again. Matteo nodded, something like respect flickering across his features. The truth begins at dawn, he said, and once we start digging, there's no turning back. Dawn had not yet broken when Therese stepped outside the safe house for the first time since the night everything fractured. The sky was a muted slate, the color of uncertainty, and the air held that thin pre-morning chill that made the world feel briefly honest. She breathed it in, hoping it might steady her. It didn't. Mateo watched her from the doorway, not hovering, but present in a way that made the shadows around him seem less threatening. He had changed his shirt, though the tension in his posture suggested he hadn't slept. He carried exhaustion like a memory he didn't have the luxury to honor. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said quietly. Therese didn't turn. "I wasn't trying to run." "I didn't think you were." There was no accusation in his tone, just fact. "But the men looking for you don't need long to find an opening." She crossed her arms, rubbing at the chill. "This wasn't supposed to be my life. No one's life is supposed to be this," Mateo murmured. "But we don't always get to choose when a past we didn't ask for reaches us." Therese pressed her lips together, then asked the question that had been chewing through her sleep. "Do you think my father knew this would happen to me someday?" Mateo's jaw tightened. "I think your father spent his last years praying it wouldn't." Silence drifted between them, quiet, heavy, their breath visible in the cold. Mateo stepped closer, just enough that she could feel his presence, but not so close that it felt like he was boxing her in. "Come inside," he said. "We need to look at the pendant again." The safe house's interior lights hummed as Mateo placed her pendant on the table. A small lamp cast a warm pool of illumination over it, the metal catching the glow like a secret waking up. Tara sat opposite him, hands clasped tightly. "You said it's a key." "More than a key," Mateo said. "It's part of a cipher. The outer ring is a coordinate wheel. The inner pattern is an identifier, your father's signature encoded into geometry." He rotated the pendant gently, each click of its mechanism soft but certain. A small alignment marker at the edge lined up with a symbol she had never noticed. Mateo reached for a thin, folded paper, notes he'd written while she slept. "Your father was meticulous," he murmured. "He hid data in patterns, not numbers. This." He tapped the pendant. "Matches an encrypted set of coordinates my people intercepted years ago, but could never unlock." Therese swallowed. "Coordinates to what?" "Whatever he died protecting," Mateo said. "Evidence, money, secrets men like Ambrose Van would kill for." Her pulse quickened. "So if we decode it, then we find leverage," Mateo finished. "Enough to stop this before they take another shot at you." She stared at the pendant, a familiar object made foreign by truth. "Show me," she said. Mateo slid the page toward her. Lines of handwritten notes, symbols mapping onto grid squares, calculations arranged in a pattern that looked almost like music, mathematical, but strangely human. A mind under pressure trying to leave a trail. Therese ran her fingertips over the page. "This doesn't even look like numbers." "It isn't," Mateo said. "It's a positional cipher. You match the pendant's rotation to this pattern, and when everything aligns..." He rotated the outer ring one last time. Click. A tiny plate inside shifted. A new engraving appeared in the hollow, a set of characters she didn't recognize, curved and angled like fragments of a map. Therese inhaled sharply. "Is that..." "Coordinates," Mateo confirmed. "But not to a city block or a storage unit. These are rural coordinates, north of the state, forest land." She leaned back, mind spinning. "So we go there." Mateo didn't answer immediately. His gaze tracked her face, measuring not her fear but her resolve. "You understand," he said softly, "that if we go, there is no undoing this. The people searching for you, they won't stop. Not until they get what they think you have." "I know," she whispered. "And you still want to move forward?" She hesitated, only for the length of one breath. "My father died. To protect whatever this is," she said. I won't let someone else die because I was too afraid to see it through. Mateo exhaled, something like reluctant admiration edging into his expression. Then you're braver than most people I've known. Therese let out a shaky laugh. I'm terrified. Good, Mateo said. Fear keeps you alive. Recklessness gets you killed. He folded the coordinates carefully, tucking them into an inner pocket. We'll leave tonight. My people will prepare a route. Your people? She echoed. Will they help? Mateo's eyes darkened. Some will. Others will see you as a threat. And some. His voice thinned. Some would rather hand you over to Ambrose to protect the organization. Teresa's breath faltered. And you? I intend to keep you alive, he said. Even if it means choosing sides I can't turn back from. The words hung between them, unexpected, unpolished, true. Then came a sound they both recognized, a muted vibration on the windowsill. Mateo crossed the room in 2 strides, checking the monitor hidden behind a false panel. His expression tightened. What is it? Therese asked. Mateo turned slowly, jaw set. They found us. Her pulse stuttered. Ambrose's men? No, Mateo said. Worse. He stepped toward her with controlled urgency. We leave now. Therese grabbed the pendant, heart pounding, and followed him. Because fate, once it arrives, doesn't wait for anyone to be ready. The hallway lights flickered once, an almost imperceptible stutter before stabilizing. But Mateo reacted as though the building had just exhaled a warning. He stepped in front of Therese, one hand raised slightly, quieting her instinct to speak. Don't move, he murmured. Footsteps echoed faintly above them, too soft for an untrained ear, but Mateo heard the rhythm immediately. Not Ambrose's men, not police. These steps were too controlled, too patient, people who knew the architecture of danger, people who knew him. Therese swallowed hard. You said this wasn't Ambrose. It's not, Mateo said. This is internal. His organization, his own people, men who were supposed to protect him. Someone leaked our location, he said, and someone wants to make a statement. A door on the far end clicked, barely audible, but Mateo was already pulling Therese behind him, guiding her toward the back exit. They moved quickly yet quietly, the urgency practiced but not chaotic. When they reached the metal stairwell, Mateo pressed a finger to his lips and motioned her down the stairs first. His movements were precise, like choreography he'd rehearsed long before she'd entered the picture. On the second-floor landing, Therese paused, heart pounding. Mateo was listening intently to the sounds above them, a faint murmur of voices, a slow, deliberate descent. They're sweeping the building, Mateo whispered. Standard protocol. Protocol for what? Therese breathed. A coup. The word felt like ice water down her spine. Why would your own people? Because protecting you means defying the expectations of very powerful men, Mateo said. And men who fear loss don't hesitate to cut loose anything, or anyone, they see as destabilizing. He nodded for her to continue down the stairwell. Keep moving. By the time they reached the basement garage, the building hummed with tension. Mateo led her across the concrete floor to a nondescript black SUV parked in the shadow of a support beam. He unlocked it manually, no remote signals to trace, and quickly opened the passenger door for her. Get in. Therese slid into the seat, adrenaline buzzing so violently through her body she felt like her skin might vibrate apart. Mateo shut the door carefully, then circled to the driver's side. When he entered the vehicle, he didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, he leaned forward, forearms braced against the steering wheel, breathing slowly. Are we trapped? She asked. No, he said. They think we're upstairs. We have a small window. He glanced at her, his eyes steady despite the danger closing in. I need you to listen carefully. Once we leave this city, we can't come back until we have leverage, until we know exactly what your father hid and use it to stop Ambrose Vin and anyone else who wants you dead. Tara's nodded, though her throat felt tight. I understand. Good, Mateo said. Because this road, once we take it, there's no safe place to turn back. He finally started the engine, the garage filled with a low rumble, swallowed mostly by soundproof walls. Mateo turned the headlights off, relying on faint emergency bulbs to guide them toward the ramp. Therese clutched her pendant. You think whatever my father left, it's enough to protect us? Mateo's expression didn't soften, but there was a rare flicker of something human beneath the hardened exterior. I think your father didn't die for nothing, he said. And I think he left something behind that terrified very powerful men. The SUV crept up the incline, each foot forward feeling like a test. As the vehicle neared the top of the ramp, Mateo paused again, scanning the alley for shadows that didn't belong. Clear, he whispered. He pressed the accelerator. They burst into the night. The city looked different now. Not a map of streets and lights, but a labyrinth of choices and consequences. Mateo maneuvered through side streets with a confidence born from years of memorizing escape routes. Every turn was intentional, every moment calculated. Therese watched the city blur past, her chest tightening with each passing block. I didn't even get to pack a bag, she whispered. You won't need one yet, Mateo replied. Where we're going, we're not staying long. And, where is that? Mateo reached into his jacket, pulling out the folded paper, the decrypted coordinates. He handed it to her carefully, like a fragile truth. She opened it. A single set of numbers stared back at her. Unremarkable at first glance, yet heavy with the weight of a man's last hope. This is where he left everything, Mateo said. Your father knew he wouldn't survive if he kept running, so he hid the truth and gave you the means to find it. Therese traced the numbers with her thumb. Why give it to me? Because he trusted you, Mateo said, or maybe because he knew the men hunting him would never suspect a child. The SUV merged onto a quieter highway leading out of the city. The skyline receded behind them, glowing faintly like a fading memory. For someone who barely knew me, Therese whispered. He asked me to carry an awful lot. Mateo didn't look away from the road. He didn't leave a burden, he said. He left a weapon. She turned to him. A weapon? A truth so dangerous it could collapse entire networks, Mateo said. And someone, Ambrose, my enemies, maybe even some of my own people, thinks you're the only one who can uncover it. Therese looked back at the coordinates. At least tell me where we're going. Mateo allowed himself the smallest breath of relief. A forest preserve, he said. Far north. Abandoned for years. What your father hid might still be there. And if it's not? Mateo glanced at her, his expression unflinching. Then we'll start guessing which enemies want you dead the most. The road stretched ahead, dark, long, and coiled with the promise of danger. But for the first time since the diner, Therese didn't feel like prey running blind. She felt like someone who finally knew where she was going, even if the truth waiting for them at the end of the road could unravel everything.